Hi, we're having a really excellent conversation with Susan Grabert. Susan, it's great to be with you. We were talking a little bit ago about just how you got your artistic start, and you've been painting for about 15 years. I'm wondering if you can take us through some of that history.
Sure. I was working in different mediums in high school and really enjoyed it. I really wanted to be an artist when I was in high school.
So early on,
Early on.
It was there, the seed.
And then when I graduated high school, life kind of reality took over, and I started working and really never got back into my art until about 15 years ago. I started out with some watercolor classes when I found out my neighbor was a well-known watercolorist in the area. And that's how I started again, and I've been painting ever since.
What were you doing before you found your neighbor as an artist and you had this desire, but what was your life like before that time?
At that point, I had gone back to college. When I was in my 30s, I got my degree, and I was working for a publishing company. I was a quality assurance manager, and I had actually worked there for 25 years. So I was painting, on weekends and in the evenings while I was working. And then just a few years ago, I left that job, took early retirement, and now I'm painting full time.
You did mention to me a little bit ago that it was not a job that you really enjoyed, and you were maybe looking for a change.
I did not enjoy my job. What I enjoyed about my job was the fact that it was limited hours. I worked 30 hours a week instead of 40, and I had a daughter at home, so it was very flexible for me. I could take off any day of the week that I wanted. So when she had something at school or some kind of appointment, I was able to take off. So it was really nice while my daughter was growing up that I was available for her. And I was kind of out on my own. I was on the road a lot. So I wasn't sitting behind a desk. So there were some things that I loved about it. I just didn't like the day-to-day processes that I had to do. So I was manager for 25 years, and it was not a great position to be in sometimes. So
I can understand that. And so you didn't just fall into art, it's something that you had been wanting to do, and so you made a commitment after retirement to dedicate yourself to painting.
Yeah, I had started out with watercolors, as I said, and I really wanted to, when I started out, I really wanted to document my travels. My husband and I travel quite a bit, and I wanted to do watercolor sketchbooks, and that's how I started. But I was also taking a lot of photographs. My husband's a photographer. I was getting into photography, and after a while I realized that the photographs I was taking, I wanted to paint from those. So after a while, I switched from watercolors to acrylics and then eventually to oils, and I paint from my photos now. I really don't do sketchbooks anymore. I just do oil paintings.
The transition from watercolor to acrylic to oil, is there a reason that transition happened? Do you preferred one medium over another, or you discovered over time what your preferred medium was,
Yeah.
or maybe it helped you to achieve what you're looking for in your art? Can you talk about that?
That's exactly what happened. It helped me achieve where I wanted to go. When I started using acrylics, I thought that was how I could get more vibrant colors and more realistic pieces. The watercolor is such a soft medium. It's very flowy. It's beautiful. I wasn't having fun with it. When I started with acrylics, I liked the medium, but I still wasn't getting the effect that I really wanted. And then when I found oils, it was that aha moment of, this is what I want to work with. This is giving me what I want. And I was able to get more of the realism that I like doing. And that was the first time that really happened. So I've been using oils now for probably close to 10 years. And that's pretty much all I work with at this point.
We had a little conversation in which you were explaining that some oils are more preferable to you than others. Could you just tell us what you discovered about oil as a person who for 10 years has been experimenting with different mediums?
I think like a lot of artists, we tend to try a lot of the brands. And you know, human nature, you go to some of the most expensive ones because you think they're going to be magic. I found that that's not true. Winsor and Newton is a reasonably priced oil paint, and I think they're very good. I like the consistency of them. But Georgian paint is really a student grade paint, and I found that some of their colors work just fine. The consistency is great, so I tend to use a mixture of those two things. The Georgian for a few of the colors and Winsor and Newton for the majority, and then I have a couple, you know, Thomas Hardy thrown in and a couple different more expensive ones where I found a color that I really like and I keep buying it.
So it depends kind of also on the color.
Right, right.
It would be interesting to hear you talk about the paintings that we're able to look at here. Can you tell us what's going on here?
Well, this first one, the ball jars, that was just taken at a flea market where someone had set up about 50 ball jars on a white table, and I just did some close-ups. And as soon as I took this photo, I saw that it needed to be large and make a statement. And I just loved the texture of the table, the peeling paint. The blue chair, that I took a photo of that chair when I was in Mexico, and it was a house museum, so they had different rooms set up. So it was a blue chair against a tile wall, and when I took the photograph, I could only get the top of it. There were things blocking the bottom, so I had to make up the rest of the chair when I got home. But when I took that photo, I knew that I had to paint it one day, but I wasn't at the level that I could paint it, so I hung on to that photo for at least 5 years before I got up the nerve to try it.
So you knew that you were developing or acquiring skills
absolutely.
over time.
Yeah, I mean, there's still things like most artists, you know where your limits are, and you strive to get better, and you hope that one day you'll get to that point. But when I took that photo, I knew there was no way I could paint it in the way that I wanted it done. So I just hung on to it and hung on to the photo, and
With the intention of someday turning it into a painting.
Right.
So are you pleased with it?
I love that painting. It's one of my favorite pieces. Yeah, especially since it's a piece that showed how far I had come at that point, you know, striving for something and then
Sure.
finally making it.
Can we talk about this one? We talked about it a while ago, and at the level of detail is an amazing phenomenon, and it must take tons and tons of time to do this. And we talked a little bit about time, so maybe we can talk about this one, and then kind of how your work life as a painter has been unfolding.
Well, we were talking about how much time I spend in the studio, and I try to do about 20 to 25 hours a week in my studio if I have that uninterrupted time. This probably took about 20 hours, I'm thinking, something like that. But this was one of the first pieces I had done from a photograph that I took once quarantine started. That was my biggest problem with quarantine, was I couldn't get out and do the photos that I wanted. And everything was shut down. The antique stores, the flea markets had stopped. So I was using a lot of old photos and photos that I had gotten on a trip that we had taken right before quarantine hit. So just a few weeks ago, I finally went out, spent the day at flea markets, antique stores, and I got that one of 3 photos that I really, really liked, and that was one of them. So I came home, and that one's called Mary's Egg Baskets.
That's beautiful. It's
Thank
absolutely
you.
beautiful.
Thank you.
So can you tell us a little bit about the technique that gets the image from the photograph through the whole process to get it on a canvas where you can then work with it?
Well, it depends on the photograph to begin with. Sometimes the photograph is very close to what I want to paint. Sometimes it's disjointed, kind of like that blue chair. The wall actually was not tiled down to the floor. It was only part of the wall. The chair was actually sitting on a corner and not on a flat wall. I don't know what the floor looked like. I don't know what the bottom of the chair looked like. So you kind of make that up as you go along.
So you're not a
Um,
literalist. You
uh,
take liberties with the photograph and do the things that you think you
if I
want to
need
do.
to. Sometimes I don't need to. I painted that pretty much exactly like the photograph, because I didn't need to change it. I think maybe the tops were changed or something like that. Um, but I do take that liberty if I don't get the perfect photograph. I spend a lot of time trying to get the photograph, and I do ask permission when I take photos in people's stores, and sometimes they're so considerate they let me move things around so I can make my own little still lifes in their store. Um, Sometimes, I don't need to do anything. They have things perfectly arranged, so it's wonderful. But once I get the photograph, for the larger pieces, I will start with a projection onto paper. Smaller pieces, I just start directly on the paper, do the drawing myself. Um, Once I get the projection, which is basically some outlines to get basic shapes, then I'll sit with the paper drawing and get the details in. And that may be a 2-day process right there to get the drawing down. Once I have the drawing on the paper and the size that I want, then I transfer it over onto my canvas. I do paint on flat canvas. I buy rolls of canvas that are primed, linen, and then I transfer it onto that canvas using carbon paper.
You mentioned earlier that you're using up your last piece of carbon paper, and it's been really difficult to get a hold of.
I don't know why everyone's sold out of it, where it's coming from, that I can't get it. So,
Can you tell us about your studio, the place that you work in? You said that you had been looking for a house for 5 years, and you found the one that you found, and instantly you knew it because there was a studio.
there was a
place in
studio.
there.
We had looked for 5 years. We were living in Reading and wanted to move out into the country, and we literally looked for 5 years and could not find the right space. My husband needed an office studio for himself because he's a photographer, and I needed a studio space that would be large enough. And all the other things that we wanted with a house. So 5 years, but when I walked into this studio, it was actually a living room for like an in-law quarter, but it's above a garage. It has skylights. It has beautiful light all day long, and it's very large. It's the size of a 2-car garage, so it was perfect. I loved it. So.
You said also that you like to be able to sell paintings or to be able to have exhibits. What is in the exhibit that is an inspiration or that helps you, or what is it about the exhibit?
Um, I think just exhibiting your work and talking to other artists and seeing other people's work, that's an inspiration right there. That's probably one of the hardest things that's happened for all artists since COVID hit, is all these exhibitions have been closed down, the galleries have been closed down. I was amazed at how much I realized that I need other artists around me to keep myself going and keep myself, just in my studio working, because of that inspiration that I get from other people and seeing other people's work. And it's not like I go out and see something that I want to copy. It's just I go out and see a great work and I think I want to be that good, and I want to push myself farther and do something better and bigger the next day. So it's been really hard not going to all these art shows, especially during the summer. That my husband and I would go to art shows like every weekend. So it's kind of put a hole in our lives for this summer.
Yeah, sure. What's it like to work with someone close to you who is also an artist using a different medium? What are the conversations like at your dinner table?
It's fun. There's a little bit of a rivalry. When we moved into this house, we joked about the wall space, and we were counting how many pieces each of us had on the walls so that it would be even. And it was a little bit of a joke, but at the same time it wasn't, because we both wanted to display our work. But it's fun. It's wonderful to have that in common with somebody. And when we got married, we had no idea that we would go in that direction. I mean, I was interested in art, but it wasn't something we talked about because I really wasn't painting at that time. I wasn't doing any kind of artwork. And he had a camera, but photography wasn't all that important to him. So it's really nice that we've grown in that direction and grown together, but in different ways.
Oh, that sounds really lovely.
Yeah.
Who have been inspirational artists for you in your life? Maybe artists that are with us today, and maybe artists that are historic or classic. Any people that influence you?
I think the teachers that I had were a huge influence. Bruce Becker got me started in oils. Phyllis Moser, who actually works here, I worked with her, did some classes. Judith Krieger was the watercolor artist that I worked with for a few years when I got started. And then really the students that I met in the classes, I became best friends with Crystal Domino. She had been painting well before I started, and I remember telling her that I wanted to be as good as her one day. And now we've become best friends, so we paint together, and lots of people around me. Just, when I see other people's work, I was looking at the exhibit when I walked in. It's the first time I got to see it hung, and there's some great pieces out there. There's some really great talent in the show, which makes me feel humbled when I see everyone else's work. And then, older artists, Van Gogh, huge inspiration. I mean, I just go crazy over his work. I had a chance to be in France and see some of the places that he worked, and lots of, there's just so many. There's so many people, and just even people that do sculpture and pottery. Anyone that's creative kind of gets me going to want to be better at what I do.
So you're inspired by creativity kind of across the board.
I think so, yeah.
I've got this question. I'm trying to figure out what an artist is. So if you had to talk about what it means to be an artist, and then what it means for you to be an artist, but artists generally speaking, what are artists? What goes on with art?
I just think it's when you have a passion to create something that will last. Something, when I started out, I remember saying to my husband, I just want to get good enough to be able to hang something on my wall and not be embarrassed by it. And then you kind of hit milestones over the years of not only can you hang it on your own walls, but you can hang it on other people's walls and in exhibitions, things like that. And it's just that passion to get better at a craft. And just feels so good about creating something that will be around. I know that my paintings are going to be in my daughter's house, when I'm gone, and I'm hoping that they'll be in her children's homes when she's gone, and I love that idea that it's going to last, at least for a little while.
So a kind of a legacy of creativity.
Yeah.
You mentioned also that you do painting by commission, and you talked about a friend, I think, who had some antique instruments. Would you mind talking about that?
Sure. She collected instruments on her travels, and she wanted me to do a painting of the collection. So I just finished that. It's drying right now in my studio, so she hasn't seen it. I'm very anxious in a lot of ways to show it to her in a week or two once it's dry.
Anxious because you want her to be pleased, or anxious because you might discover that something needs still to be done, or?
A little bit of everything. She's a friend. I want her to be happy. I want her to be pleased. It's just nerve-wracking doing commissions because they haven't seen the product until it's in their home. So, when you're selling a piece at a show, they're seeing it, they fall in love, obviously, they want it, they want to spend money on it, but a commission piece is totally different. All she saw so far was a photograph of the still life that I created before I started the painting.
And so when she sees it for the first time, it won't be in your studio, it will be in her own dwelling.
I will be taking it to her house, and then we'll decide on a frame from there.
So you're part of the framing process as well?
Yes. Oh. I like to be part of that framing process. I think it's putting the jewelry on the out, you know.
What does that
adding the-
mean, putting the jewelry on?
Putting the accessory on your outfit.
Okay.
It's the finishing touch. I think the frames are very important.
Cool. It's been delightful chatting with you, Susan. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.